Good evening and welcome to another episode of the Vigilante Dialogues Buzz. I'm your host, Shaina Smith Archer, here with my good friends, Gary Reimer and Eddie Wenka. And if you're just now catching us this week, this is a special series of my program, the Vigilante Dialogues, where, we talk about all things community. And I wanted to do a special series this month talking about more in depth of the constitutional review that's currently going on to help us understand more about how our country is run as we see and how it affects our daily lives as citizens of these Virgin Islands. So I'll pause there and allow my friends to say good night. We're also simulcast on Tola Radio VI FM 100.5 as well as on Facebook Live and YouTube Live. So if you want to join us on line, you can go ahead and log in right now on the Facebook page for Vigilante Dialogues. Gary, how was your week?
Very busy week, and I see things are getting busy down there as well.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Edwanga, how was your week?
It was good. Peace and blessings, everyone. It's good to be on with you again, you and Gary. Everything went smoothly. I have to give a plug for the secondary school debates.
Oh, yes. I heard.
They started yesterday, and we have another one tomorrow. I can't remember the moods out of my head, but
okay.
It's you could check it out on the government Facebook page. On the debate starts at 10 tomorrow morning.
Okay.
So you can check it. It's promising to be a good debate. And the students have improved tremendously over the years. And we're bothering on having some real professional debates take place with some good research, good points being made, and potential influence in public policy. So I'm inviting everyone to tune in tomorrow. But everything is good for me, It's either a lesson or a blessing.
Hey, I agree. I completely agree. So I sent out a post and I put on there who's captaining our ships, right? So again, as we're talking about the Constitution, understanding how it's working. And I was sharing with a friend today that, I found myself in Constitution 101, Gary, because I was putting together my comments, I would say, for the Constitutional Review Commission, because the deadline was this week. So I do hope that the persons took the opportunity, whether it was via email, through their website, or, delivering a hard copy to the Constitution Office, the Commission's office, with their thoughts about what needs to go into our next Constitution. So, I was reading up the TCI's Constitution, Cayman Island, alongside of ours, and it was very enlightening, to say the least. So I said tonight we have a lot of good information to share. I don't know if we're going to get through all of it, but we're going to definitely try. So we're going to jump into it because, one of the things I said tonight to a friend is like, I really am disappointed that this year is going to be 30 years since I graduated from high school, Gary. And now I'm learning about my Constitution. So it keeps highlighting for me the importance of this knowledge being taught in our school system. These are the things that our children should be doing book reports on. Write your thoughts on chapter 2, which talks about the executive branch and different things like that, because that's how they're gonna start to internalize these things. And when they hear different things in the news, they can say, yes, we learned that in social studies or whatever we call the class, to see these things now start to become more relevant to their day-to-day lives. And as they grow and when they become adults, this is already part of their understanding of as a citizen of the country. So Carmela and I, we talk about that stuff all the time. And drink always, it's the importance of good citizenship.
Yep.
It's as if to say there needs to be a class that teaches these things, not just for persons who want to become citizens of the country, but those of us who, we kind of just take it for granted. We know what it means to be a good citizen because we are a citizen.
And I think people aren't realizing that they're governed by something.
Mhm.
They're going by their regular day-to-day work every day, but on the outside, or not really the outside, but there is some kind of document that's governing the way things are run, the way people should live, the way people should be treated. There's something called a constitution that the BVI has one that is there. But as you stated, I myself, I think it was probably like 8 years ago. I think probably 8 years ago, I think I had really downloaded it and started reading it like from beginning to end. And the things I saw was really things that I learned on my own. I wasn't taught this in school at any stage in school. But again, as you talked about too, it's something that we should be familiar with, because when we do these reforms, it helps us to kind of help shape what we want to go as the vision as far as moving forward. But if you're not aware of what you currently have, how can you contribute to where you want to go or move forward, or be educated about it?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know.
and that's key.
I,
Go ahead,
I,
Karma.
I don't know if social study is still taught in school.
I know for sure in
Primary school.
primary school and junior
Or high
high. I'm
school.
not too sure what happens at the senior level, because then they start to choose their own classes.
Now, I'm
So
wondering whether the teachers need to have any special permission to teach about the Constitution, or civics, or anything political, social,
mhm.
economics, uh, in civics class, or social studies. I think they can choose subjects that are relative to those categories. So I don't know why, I don't know if, I don't think that special permission is needed to teach about the Constitution. That's something we have to find out. But it definitely is something that needs to be
Yeah,
taught. We need to understand not only the Constitution, but we need to understand the political system under which we are governed, and the economic
mhm.
system that we use to distribute our resources. And we need to learn about other economic systems. Like, we are predominantly a capitalist economic system, but we need to understand our socialist economic system as well. We are primarily
Mhm.
primarily a democracy, which is the political system. And one of the things that I notice that happens to us is that we tend to think that only capitalism is democracy, that you can't have a democracy that's socialist, which is not true. A political system is democracy, which is a representative form of government, and you could have, and socialism is a economic system where the population owns the production, the means of production of goods and services through the representative government. So you can have a socialist democracy, and you could have a capitalist democracy, which is an economic system where individuals own the means of production of goods and services. So
Mhm.
all of these things we need to understand, so we can understand what is the systems that are governing us under the Constitution. So all
Yeah,
those things go together in one study group.
yeah, yeah, and it's something like you're saying. There's the curriculum that I think guides overall the content, but how these topics can maybe be interwoven in there until we have the next curriculum review, to make sure now that just as important as English, math, science, in terms of just your basic knowledge sets, that you want to make sure that your citizens in there go through your education system have. It's important. So, but before we go off into a different show, because Gary, he gave me all of this earlier today, And I was like, it's the more we talk and the more we research, the more we realize what we don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
And start to realize like, okay, some of these things really need to be institutionalized. It shouldn't be just if I'm interested in this, I go and I study it. It has to be that this is something that's important for everybody, and there's some basic information that we want to make sure that people have. And for those that are the geeks and nerds like me, you go off and do more research and more reading and all of that. But quick stop for a public service announcement. Please register to vote if you have not voted. You have not registered and turned 18 since the last election. The elections office is now located in the building next to what we know as Quickie Shoe Store upstairs. And I didn't check. I was supposed to check to make sure I was given accurate information in terms of if the voter registration cards are available for those who are registered but haven't received their cards to go and pick those up. So I'll have that information by next week. But you can also call the government switchboard, ask for the office of the election supervisor, because the earlier we get that out to the way, the better for everybody, right? So again, that's your right as a citizen, and it's a responsibility as well. But we'll do a whole show on that one of these days. But we shouldn't take it for granted, because there were all forefathers at one point couldn't participate in a democracy because of the rules that govern who could vote until you had universal suffrage and it was given to everybody except women, and then women had to fight for the right to vote. That's insane. It's okay. We're gonna get it all sorted out, Gary. All right. So again, we were talking 2 weeks ago. It's 3 weeks ago now. We started off talking about the Commission of Inquiry report and the recommendations that came forward. One of them being a constitutional review. The fact that the constitutional review actually had already been initiated back in 2020. So this was something that was supposed to have been in progress, but it had not gotten very far. So there were some revisions to the terms of reference. Additional portions were added to the commission, and they hit the road around October. And we're doing community meetings, or whether it was public meetings or actually persons could make appointments. So it was quite a bit of activity for the last 4 months. But again, because there's so much we don't know, we wanted to keep the conversation going. Because maybe by chance they'll be listening in the background as things come. But I'm going to publish my contribution that I did, and so that again, to share more information with persons on some of the things that I found. But one of the questions persons always ask is about what's the governor's role and responsibility, and how does that compare against the premier? Because some persons that would say very strongly that, the governor is who's in charge because he's representing the queen. And the fact that we're a colony means that, she's the head of state. Now, I want to just debunk something in terms of persons saying England owns us. England is the administrative power, or they have the sovereign power over the territory, the country. The last time people owned people, it was called slavery.
Right.
And we said that is not legal anymore. So when we use those types of terminology, we have to be very careful, because then it really sets up a situation where now you think that somebody is your master and you have to just do whatever they tell you. You're not supposed to question anything. And, the different analogies that we would hear being used. So again, if we're going to make some intelligent decisions around what our political future and relationship is going to be with them, we have to understand what it is. And we're hoping to have a guest join us tonight that, he's very passionate about this type of stuff. But I'm going to flip to our constitution and just read some of the things in terms of the general responsibilities of the governor, and let you guys give me your thoughts on what it says. So we have a governor that is appointed by Her Majesty, or let me switch this up, the sovereign, male or female. I'm still getting used to the switch. In terms of they're given a period of time where they are here in terms of governing the country, and they have powers and duties. Everything is laid out through and throughout the Constitution in terms of what this person is to do and can do. Now, there is a deputy governor which is said that this person should be a Virgin Islander as defined in our constitution. And that this person, acts in the office of the governor in their absence or any other duties as they may delegate to them. And that's different from when somebody is appointed as the acting governor, because I don't know if persons ever have realized that sometimes we've had persons who aren't sitting as the deputy governor act as governor. So the constitution allows for that to happen in instances where it's defined there in terms of that, and then the governor delegates certain responsibilities that he's responsible for. So if I go down, I wanted to look at something. So in the question of who is the captain of the ship, one of the things I went and I was looking at was what's called the executive branch, and the executive authority is how it's referred to. And it says that the executive authority is vested in the sovereign, right? So in this case, it's the king. And that's who we refer to as the head of state. So really, truly, this is who's in charge, right, of everything. And they delegate, or they can give away power or devolve it, as it said, to do that. So subject to our constitution, the executive authority now of the Virgin Islands may be exercised on behalf of the sovereign by the governor, either directly or through officers subordinate to him or her. So again, he can delegate duties to the governor or anybody else in the public service, or even ministers. This is first point of information. So I went and I looked at TCI's constitution as well as the Cayman Island constitution, and I found that the difference there that Cayman has is that the executive authority of the Cayman Islands is vested is exercised by the government. And then it says, and the government is the governor and the cabinet. So you see now there's a difference in terms of balance of power, where the cabinet now is truly part of the governance structure. They haven't interpreted wrong, but I'm still doing the research on it to make sure I'm explaining it right. And that's where, persons may ask the question, because again, people feel that the premier has more power than the governor, and that based on this constitution, that's not what I see. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I read that before too. That was one of my points when I was doing the recent review, because I saw that what you just stated before, because I know we've been talking over the years as a country as far as trying to limit or reduce the powers of the governor and trying to make it more localized. But the way the Constitution is written is even if we were to go down that route and try to limit the powers of the governor, the way the Constitution is written is the sovereign still has power, meaning the sovereign can give or take away power. So even if we feel we can write something in the Constitution for the governor, the superseding power or authority above that is still the sovereign. So meaning, I think in our Constitution it says at any time the sovereign can give power to the governor at will or at a particular time. So your point goes back to us trying to have power which is localized. We would need to kind of change the way the power structure is set up.
Exactly.
In the Constitution, because you could say you want to give the power limited structure, but it still states that the sovereign is the head, and the sovereign at any time can give power to the governor at any time, at any will.
Yeah.
So we indirectly have no control over that part because of the way the Constitution is written.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just want to ask a question, Shaina. When it says the government is the executive authority,
mm-hmm.
Who assents to the laws passed in the House of Assembly?
So it's still only the governor.
So is the governor, that's his sole power. The power is his alone to assent or not to the legislation that's passed in the House.
Yeah, because again, the executive authority is in the sovereign, and the sovereign now is represented by the governor. So it's like saying our legislature would pass laws, but then the sovereign has to assent to them to for them to be official.
Right. So even though it says in the Turks and Caicos,
They came on.
Cayman, and
Mhm.
even though it says in the Cayman that the government is the executive authority, really the real power still remains in the hands of the governor, because legislation cannot be enacted without the governor's approval.
Yeah.
Is
Well,
that
yeah, and that's because that's the structure now that is laid
yeah?
out. And we're gonna
So,
do actually a separate show about the legislature because that's a whole
so
different.
that's just wording. I
Yeah.
mean, to me, the situations are different in wording between our constitution and the Cayman constitution.
Oh no
But
no,
the power
you're
is the same.
asking if the came on if the governor has to assent. I'll have to double check that. Don't quote me
Oh,
on
okay.
that part.
Yeah,
But in
because
ours now, the structure is that the governor has to assent. So if we go to clause 60 in our constitution now, this is where it speaks about the governor's special responsibility. So again, to bring clarity to what is here, saying that this is the governor's responsibilities. The governor shall be responsible for the conduct of any business of the government of the Virgin Islands, including the administration of any department of government, with respect to the following matters. A. External affairs, subject to subsection 4, which is further down. Defense, including the armed forces. C. Internal security, including the police force, without prejudice to section 57. D, the terms and conditions of persons holding or acting in public offices without prejudice to section 92, and the administration of the courts. So those are the things. So persons talk sometimes about reserve powers, but again, reserve powers means that anything there in terms of delegated powers, the governor can still step in and make a different decision. And it brought home, I would say, to me, the conversation I had with Dr. Caroline Corbin, as it relates to his report, where he did an assessment on, where we are as a self-governing territory. And his conclusion was that, everything was, the decisions really were resting with just one person in most cases, and saying that even though you may be able to take action or do some work on certain things, it's you still have that situation where the governor acting on behalf of the sovereign, because that is the administrative power for the country, can step in and say, no, we're not going this way, or actually
legislation.
actually create laws, and create decrees that we have to follow, because based on our constitution, this is how it's set up. So at the end of that paragraph, it said the governor shall keep the premier fully informed concerning the general conduct of these matters, and the premier may request information in respect to any particular matter.
That's the Cayman.
No, that's ours.
That's ours.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the governor is the approver of legislation
Mm-hmm.
and responsible and the head of the justice system,
So he's
and
responsible for the administration of the courts.
yeah, and
Uh-huh.
and in charge of the force.
Yes.
So all the power rests with the governor.
So external affairs, defense. So exterior defense, local
All the
defense.
all the power rests with the governor.
Well,
We,
I
we,
would
we,
still, I would still think that. So, technically speaking, so when there are contracts and stuff that are drawn by particular departments within government,
Mm-hmm.
those are decisions that are made locally by the elected officials usually. So those don't usually have to go to the governor for approval, right? Those are all, even though he's in charge of the public service per se, as meaning the people, but as far as the running, the entering into contracts, getting bids and those things, the elected officials through their ministries, through their departments, run and control that part of government, right?
So I'm glad you brought that up, Gary. Because now
Do they-
let's talk.
they really-
Let me talk. Well, that's a good point. So let's talk about what are the responsibilities of the executive in terms of the ministers. So clause 56. The governor shall, acting in accordance with the advice of the premier, by directions in writing, assign to any minister responsibility for the conduct, subject to this constitution and any other law, of any business of the government, including responsibilities for the administration of any department. Right? So remember now, after an election, there's someone that goes to the governor and says, I command a majority of seats out of the persons that were elected, and they want me to become the premier. And then from there, the premier would advise the governor in terms of the ministerial appointments to the cabinet to say who will be responsible for what. So that's why now those responsibilities have been delegated into what we refer to as a ministerial system. So you have ministers that do that. So for the most part, I think, you have lanes, everybody stays in the lane. The ministers now come together and sit in the cabinet. The governor also co-chairs the cabinet, but he does not have a vote. But again, in my mind, he doesn't need a vote because of the level of powers that exist inside of this constitution. So this is how now I understand. I'm really starting to understand my friend Troy Christopher when he says the constitution needs to be decolonized. Because, when you go back to probably the 1950 constitution, where there wasn't ministerial government, everything now was the responsibility of the administrator or commissioner is what they would refer to that person as. I think after we came out of the Leeward Island Federation, the name changed. So it was a while before it actually became known as the governor. But the governor back in those days was actually the governor of the Leeward Island Federation, which was, St. Kitts, Antigua, Os, Montserrat, Anguilla, and a few others, in terms of the British colonies that were there after emancipation, and how these things came together in terms of our saying. Again, we said in the last show, I think I talked about how we came out. We lobbied to come out of the federation because, laws there weren't affecting us for our best interest and in our benefit. So the idea was, we need our own representation. And as Cromwell talked about, democracy of the people, by the people, for the people. So that situation there with the federation was not of us, by us, or for us.
I want to ask you another question.
Go ahead.
The governor has to approve the suggested appointments of the elected representatives.
I think so. And this is one of the things too I was looking closer at, because there are certain places where it will say the governor acts in accordance with the advice of
the premier,
individual or body, or it might be in consultation. He acts after consultation. So usually if something says after consultation, again, it's given leeway for a different decision to be made. But if you're acting in accordance with advice, then usually they line up in terms of what is advised.
Well, see, this is the point I'm trying to make, that a lot in the Constitution is language.
Mm-hmm.
And the language sounds like we have power, like we are running things. But
we have some.
But I don't know. Do we? What power we have? Really?
We have some. But you can't take for granted what we do have, though. I think we have advanced.
Let's do what we have.
Well, the fact that you have like the minister of land, right, which is one of the things that we have in terms of dealing with Crown lands. So the other OTs don't necessarily they don't have it at the same level where that has been I don't know if it's delegated. It's probably delegated, which means it can be taken back. Delegated to the minister, and the minister is accountable to the cabinet, versus the governor is still who controls Crown land. the disbursement of Crown land.
But in disbursement of Crown land, does it go to the legislature?
No, that's all those things are dealt with by the cabinet. The
So
cabinet
those are cabinet decisions,
yeah.
and
It's
and
like
the gov
uh,
and the governor is the chairman of the cabinet.
co-chair. It's how
Co-chair.
He
with this
doesn't. He
last,
doesn't
yeah.
vote, right? He doesn't vote.
No, he doesn't vote
He doesn't vote, but he's a co-chair of the cabinet.
with the premier.
Yeah. So if we
Let me make
if
sure I'm reading that right. Go ahead.
so how is Crown land how is approval for Crown land disbursement or gets is done?
Well, you're sending me to do homework.
Okay. Well, yeah, because you see, when I look at the Constitution and we talking,
Mhm.
I get the sense like a lot of what is said is language, but when it comes to real power, the ability to say yes or no, I am seeing that power consistently being rest in the hands of the governor. You see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So in other words, our representatives, they help to manage our affairs in common as long it does not contradict or run afoul of the interests of the United Kingdom. And to me, that's where the colonial status lies.
Mhm.
You
Well,
know,
exactly. But I
yeah,
found the clause for you. So it says Crown Lands 41, subject to any law for the time being enforced in the Virgin Islands, the governor or the minister, when duly authorized by the governor by writing under his or her hand in His Majesty's name and on His Majesty's behalf, may under the public seal make grants and disposition of lands or other immovable property of the Virgin Islands or interests, right? But any such grant or disposition shall require prior approval of the cabinet. Good?
okay. So it has to be approved by the cabinet and and sanctioned by the governor.
Authorized, yes.
Authorized.
No, well,
Well,
It
it's
can't be,
well,
it can't be the cabinet alone, or is the cabinet with the governor's approval?
no,
The
based on
governor is in the cabinet.
yeah, but he can't vote. So okay, let me do it. Let me read it again and show you something. So notice says the governor or the minister who is duly authorized by the governor.
The minister of
So even
resources.
so, even though you have a minister of natural resources who is responsible for this, it doesn't take away anything from the governor because they say governor or can bring a request, I guess, for disbursement of land, but it has to go to cabinet for approval. So it's not that the governor approves what cabinet already approves in this
But
instance.
but if the governor doesn't approve it, can it go through?
But he doesn't have to approve it.
He
That's
doesn't
what
have the power. He doesn't have the power. It goes to the cabinet, right? See,
based
based
on
on
how this
based on what is
Governor,
particular clause is written, right? Because
yeah,
again, it might have something in resolve powers that says a different decision can be made. But based on how this is, you don't need the governor's approval with
the
disbursement of
disbursed land.
whether it's the minister or the governor brings it to cabinet. Cabinet is who approves it. It has to be done. It will require the prior approval of the cabinet.
But the governor can approve it as well.
We can't
Without,
approve it. He
No.
can
can the
bring it
governor
to the
approve it?
cabinet for approval.
Okay.
That's how I understand that. So that's kind of a balance, again, the check and balance. So he can go ahead and do it, and probably in previous versions of this, he may not have had to bring things for cabinet approval.
I don't. It seems to be some ambiguity there somewhere. I can't put my finger on it. But one of the things that's why we just call the English language the language of the devil.
Really? That's what people say?
Yeah, because you could say the same thing in so many different ways, and it can have so many different meanings.
Yeah.
That's why when they write piece of legislation or decision of the courts, they would usually say, for the avoidance of doubt, this is what this means.
Yeah.
You ever heard that phrase? You ever seen
Yes.
that
Yes.
phrase?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they have to say that so that there is no mistake about what's being said, because it could be interpreted several different ways.
Well, that's why you have the court system and you have the legal minds that go in there and they debate these things for weeks on end.
Yeah.
But I found something else too that I've heard recently where persons were saying, whether or not the governor can be taken to court. This is how I heard it. So again, under Section 40, exercise of the governor's function. This is 6. Yes, under 40 sub 6. When the governor is directed by this constitution to exercise any function in accordance with the advice of or after consultation with any person or authority, the question whether he or she has so exercised that function shall not be inquired into in any court.
I think Cayman has the same thing too. I think I read the same thing in Cayman.
Similar, yeah. And again, this says now that if you as a citizen, any authority, so whether it was an appointed figure such as the governor, or even let's say for example if it was the premier, and it said something like this that says, I can't get a judicial review or take appeal to a court of law on a decision that was made concerning my affairs. So when we're looking at balance and checks and balances of power, I would have thought that the court system would be the last place of appeal, right? But this is saying no. So then it makes me wonder, well so if you had a situation where I guess we could say a rogue governor, you'd have to then petition to his bosses to get any redress on anything. And in a democratic society, it doesn't bode well with me.
So despite the judicial process, the governor is the ultimate law. Is that what that's saying?
We'll have to get a lawyer on to say that that's what I'm saying, but I'm telling you how when I read it, I didn't feel well about that.
I think that's an argument that Troy was having today. I think.
Oh yeah.
That the government, and a lot of persons in the community is having that problem, that the governor is accountable to who?
Mm-hmm.
The governor is only accountable to the foreign office.
Yeah, the foreign
his majesty.
Mm-hmm.
So and this is what I'm saying. Despite the language that appears as if we have some power, it's almost like an illusion.
So,
it only looks that way.
So here's what go ahead.
When it comes down to the final analysis, the governor is the dictator. He says what it's going to be. He approves what he wants to approve, and he goes. He's the authority outside of the judiciary. Where in a democracy like America, for example, the president, everything in America is under the court system, is under the judiciary.
Yeah, you have a place of appeal.
So if the president make a decision, you can appeal to the courts and go as high as the Supreme Court. If the governor make a decision here that we don't like, who do we appeal to?
Very good question.
It
doesn't seem to be.
We appeal to his boss.
Well, also in the US,
I can't say that because again, those are things that should be laid out as a process someplace.
Yeah,
you understand?
Yes.
Not just that we could write to because we could write to the foreign secretary, we could write to FC, Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, but there's no process in place that even says that they are accountable to respond or address If you have a proper appeal process that lays out, well, if Gary feels that this is a violation of his constitutional rights, then this is how he would go about getting redress as it relates to that. Because this segues, and I want to just pull this in terms of a human rights commission and the importance of that. Because the fact that we received this structure in the Constitution, and I just dropped out. So we received a Human Rights Commission in the Constitution of 2007. We also received the Bill of Rights. But who has been defending the Bill of Rights? Where was I supposed to go to appeal a violation of my rights based on the new Constitution if the Human Rights Commission did not exist? And I find it inexcusable why this was not set up over the last, where are we at now, 15 years?
Yep.
You know, you can't, I don't know, there's no justification. I can't, as a citizen of my country, I cannot accept anything they bring to me with this, because it is very fundamental and important, again, in the governance. And if we're serious about good governance and giving the people, being of the people, you have to give the people redress. So you as a politician not putting these things in play because you feel somebody might go to the Human Rights Commission and complain or file, that's their right, because it is now in the Constitution. The commission might come back and say, well, no, this isn't this isn't a violation. It is still in alignment with the Constitution, or it might, you know, they will make the judgment. But even those are things that still have to be put into regulations in terms of how do I go to the Human Rights Commission with a particular matter, and what is the process now that has to take place there. So those are things now where we don't need a Human Rights Commission. We just need to enact the things that are in the Constitution and make sure that they are functioning and going forward. Someone just posted a comment. So they said, let me bring it up. The governor has the power of the Secretary of State behind him to allow or disallow laws made by the House of Assembly. Yep. So he's confirming what it is we were talking about, the legislative branch, right? So that's where it's at. So for persons, time has gotten away from us already. If you want to call in, you can make comments online, but you can also call in at 541-1192, either on WhatsApp or directly, to share your comments and thoughts about this, and where we need to be going. Because again, when we talk about how well the Constitution is working for us, because that's one of the questions now in the terms of reference. You know, we have to look at, we have responsibilities, Edwinka, but not necessarily ultimate power, right? You can make some decisions around certain things that these things have been delegated, so they are yours to deal with.
As long as they're approved.
Yeah. No, there are things that the ministers, again, the powers have been given to them, so they do what they have to do. Whatever needs to be brought to cabinet. So, for example, with contracts,
yep.
So you can go through the tendering of a project, you know, bring the quotations together, and then a recommendation is made to cabinet in terms of approval of the contract.
Governor's not
that goes back. So that doesn't involve the governor's office. So you're able to control those areas, because what it is that those subjects used to be, again, controlled by the governor, and over the years these things were delegated. So we're able to make decisions, and essentially they're not there. The legislative branch now is where the governor has to assent to laws, but not necessarily a policy.
Well, one of the places you're talking about redress, but one of the places that we can find redress, we will go over the UK's head to the United Nations. I don't think that we look at that option enough to even have the powers, some of the powers of the governor limited or devolved. We can make a plea to the United Nations, because under Article 73, the administering power has a responsibility to advance their charge, which is us, towards a full measure of self-governance. That's a part of their response. That's a part of their responsibility under the United Nations Charter. Now, of course, the United Nations can't make any nation do anything,
Right.
right? But what happens is that it brings embarrassment. It has a embarrassing factor on the global stage, and so you have to rely on international peer pressure to get the redress,
Yeah.
to get
I,
action.
I will play devil's
Again.
I will play, I will play devil's advocate and say
Don't advocate the devil.
the
The devil got enough advocates.
Yeah, enough
Yeah,
help, right?
go ahead.
So on the UK side, their argument could be, well, the BVI landers, the people, we haven't heard from them as far as they wanting a change. So from our point of view, they're okay because from our point of view, no, they haven't voiced their opinion of change. They're good where they are right now. So UN, you can start on this right now because the people haven't said they wanted a change.
And that's exactly what they have said.
I was going to
Gary.
say that's truth.
That's exactly.
That ain't a hypothetical situation.
Yeah, that's exactly what they have said. Now the UN has rejected that position. They have not agreed with that position. But of course, Britain is still holding fast to that. And I don't think, I think if my memory serves me correctly, the Committee of 24 that deals with these issues, the UK refused to recognize that committee. So the UK then have already decided, listen, we're not even a colony anymore.
Well,
We have a level of autonomy. We are satisfied with that. We don't want independence, and we can and so therefore it's inaccurate for the United Nations to put us in the same category as a colony. And I think that's what the UK has decided for themselves and tried to get the UN to accept, which the UN has rejected. And you could find the assessment of where we are in terms of full measure of self-governance that Dr. Corbyn did is an extremely valuable document that all of us need to read.
Right. Yeah,
Yes,
I'm
no.
I sent you a copy, right?
I think so, but I'm gonna share his presentation in the comment log so that persons could go and watch his presentation that he did.
One quick question I have: whose responsibility is it to educate the people on the different options that they have? Is it the UK's responsibility of educating the people on what their options are for self-governance? Should they be the ones lining up options and education, or is it the elected officials, government responsibility? Whose ultimate responsibility is it to educate the people?
Well, according to Article 73, it appears that the UK has that responsibility. But I wouldn't leave, and the UK has not taken that responsibility upon themselves to do. They don't give us any, nothing comes from the governor's office in that regard, which we would think that would be where that education process would come from. But I wouldn't blame the UK representative for not fulfilling that role. I blame all elected representatives for not fulfilling that role. That we should take more responsibility to educate ourselves,
to put pressure for it to happen
about our governance structure, as you mentioned earlier, Shaina, and what role we play, what powers we actually have, what powers the governor has, and how do we mitigate our governance where we could our goal of a full measure of self-governance can be achieved under the three categories that you mentioned last time, and you remember better than me. But independence, free association, and integration, and our self-determination as ability to determine which of those categories we want to apply for a full measure of self-governance under. Now, I don't see how a full measure of self-governance could be achieved through integration. You know what I mean? Like that's sort of like
Yeah, if you
contradiction of
understand
power.
what that means, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's sort of saying you submit now to the administrative power, with some type of trade-off. And I've been watching closely what's happening in Bonaire and some of the other Dutch territories in terms of how that looks and how it's been affecting the local population. And again, we're gonna have a conversation on it. But as we start to wrap up, I want to share with you guys the point that I had put in my letter to the Constitution Commission as it relates to that in terms of self-governance, because again, this is part of their terms of reference. Like, where they were asking, what do you think needs to happen in terms of our next move, without saying it's about politics or political status. And, I reference again the same report, the 2022 self-governing assessment report that was done by Dr. Corbin. Again, this was not about a public opinion survey. This was a technical study where there's a list of indicators that are used to say, we're going to look at your constitution, look at your law, look at your power structure, all these technical things about your country, and see whether or not you meet the definition by the United Nations of a self-governing territory. So our status, or how we're categorized within the UN, is a non-self-governing territory. And it's supposed to be, we move forward to one or the other based on the charter that was issued nowhere in the fourth decade. So that's to say 40 years ago, that the UN nations came together and said that it is, the right thing to do to allow a people to decide to govern themselves. That's to me all this rhetoric is. And I don't like global politics because it's a bunch of talking for a very long period of time. Because here we are 40 years later talking about decolonization, and there are still 17 countries that are being, I would say, held on to for various reasons. So my note I had here, Drinka, was that a path with a timetable. So this needs to be in the new constitution. A pathway with a timetable should be established, leading to the attainment of the full measure of self-governance. This may need to be done in stages so as to not to overwhelm the systems, because there's a lot of things that are going to have to go into place. Again, if you remove the head of state, that power has to be vested in somebody or some entity, right? So it will, just like we didn't start off with ministerial government and having a cabinet, it came in stages and we progressed over time. Is the same approach that should be taken. As long as it states in our constitution that the UK's interests are greater than Virgin Islands' interests, which Cromwell referenced, and it's in there several places where, those circumstances would give the governor right to make a decision and say, well, the UK interests trump what would be in the best interest of the local people. That's how I take it. And as a result of that, it's an autocratic or a colony situation, as we said, and cannot operate as a democracy of a government for the people, of the people. Because the of the people part to me is very crucial, where the head of state is not of the people. You understand? It's still operating as it would have back hundreds of years ago, where you had a king and you had subjects. And that's essentially what it would have been when these islands were initially colonized, and the plantation era, and our ancestors were brought over as free labor to work these plantations. You understand? We didn't come over here on vacation. we were here under duress. So it's the historical context of how we got here is something that we have to now start to keep at the forefront of our mind to determine. 50 years ago, Hope Stevens, H.R. Penn, and a group of others got together and said, listen, we need to get back. We need to have self-governance. We need to start moving this forward, right? And here we are now still facing the same question in terms of how we go about becoming more to the place of governing our own affairs. And the misinformation that, you know, all of us are corrupt. All of us, there are people here who are well able, you know, and again, it's going to take exposure, it's going to take training and development, again, over a period of time before we can get to that place. But the Decolonization Commission now is what I suggested needs to go into the new constitution. And the function of that will be to conduct an extensive public education program on the political status options, which are integration, free association, or independence. And again, these are general categories. What these look like, the UN doesn't have a cookie cutter that says, okay, to have independence, this is what it's going to look like. Those are things that have to be negotiated as part of it. And with that commission in the constitution now and functioning, you know, their job is complete when we are decolonized.
Well, let me say this. Full measure self-governance for the Virgin Islands, for us, is going to be an uphill battle as far as the UK is concerned. The misguided notion that if we want to be independent, we could be independent anytime. Britain is ready to let us go because some people say, oh, we have nothing to offer Britain, which is a completely false assertion. According to Global Britain, and I don't know if you saw the article that recently came out. I don't see where it came from, but the heading says arrest constitutional tensions and the UK government. And it says since 2010, the coalition government and successive conservative administrations, while still accepting the right of self-determination, have shown more direct enthusiasm for keeping the connections closer to we respect your right to leave. The connection closer to we respect your right to leave if you must, but we would much prefer you to stay. So the United Kingdom is saying, while we respect your right to leave, in another part of the article, it states that the colonies are an advantage to the United Kingdom, particularly in this time when the United Kingdom has left the European Union and is struggling socially and economically. The colonies presents an advantage for them on the global stage, and they much prefer that we remain not necessarily colonies, but integrated into the United Nations political structure. And you hear it in the language. For example, when we started referring to the Virgin Islands instead of the British Virgin Islands, we now refer to the Virgin Islands as Virgin Islands UK. And when you say, and I don't know, you know, it's a subtle point, but when you say Virgin Islands UK, it sounds more like the Virgin Islands is a province of the United Kingdom,
which is not,
as opposed to a separate country.
And there's a big difference, eh?
And yeah, so this language now is beginning to change, and in Global Britain, it shows that the overseas territories produces a significant importance on the global stage to the United Kingdom. Plus, the United Kingdom now needs resources and it needs markets. So they are not in a hurry. They are not enthusiastic about giving away any land or allowing any land
any resource
to have the opportunity to choose its own destiny and to have its own affiliations on the global stage. So, you know, if we think that the UK is willing to give us independence, that's only in word. but behind the scenes, they are working and creating scenarios and circumstances for full integration into the United Kingdom body politic and its social, political, and economic system.
Mhm.
And I think it's probably a catch-22, right? Because based on that, I mean, their feelings are based on or I guess or resistance, or really not of voicing or opinion where we want to be as a people. So automatically they feel, oh, these people of these Virgin Islands, it's been years, it's been 50, 60, they're comfortable with what we feel. So yes, we can bring them into the fold because they're comfortable to come into the fold. They've been sitting here all these years, nothing been happening. So I think it's our responsibility as a people to focus on our own self-governance and make our voices heard. And I think it goes back to this full circle now again, because education is a big part of this too, because the majority of people out there don't really know what's under the Constitution. They don't know the different options that are available. I think for us to really be serious and really go about this particular option is, it goes back to what Shaina talks about, is having some kind of commission that's part, that their role is decolonization from the UK, but part of it is the education as well too. So
Yeah.
I think it's a catch-22 here, where the UK, as you said, may not want to do that, but I think we as the people have the right to
It's our responsibility.
our responsibility, correct, to decide where we want to do, if
Yeah.
we want to become independent or whatever other options. We as a
Mhm.
people decide that's what we want to do.
Yeah.
But look what has happened. Look what has happened over the last several months. A situation has been created in the Virgin Islands where Virgin Islanders now have a deeper mistrust for each other than ever before. Anybody feeling that? That's just me.
No, you're right. We
Right.
said that in
I
the
agree.
very first show about the
Yep.
division
We
and
did.
the distrust and the despair that we in know right now.
So if we were to take a referendum now as to whether we want self-governance or we
And
want
we,
to remain a United Kingdom colony or even integrate and become part
Of the United Kingdom.
of the United Kingdom, and you
Yeah.
see what has happened to the Dutch colonies, they
Mhm.
are integrated. I think the
Some of
United Kingdom,
some of them are, not all.
yeah, okay, that seems to be the preference, and I think the United Kingdom is looking at that as a model, and of
Mm.
course the United States with the U.S. Virgin Islands is a similar model.
Mhm.
So those are models of integration that the United Kingdom is, I think the United Kingdom is looking at rather than advancing as supposed to be in the United Nations Charter, instead of advancing our increased level of self-governance for the people of the Virgin Islands.
Yeah.
it's not in their best interest to educate us about it. It's not in their best interest.
Right. And so we have to educate ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we are doing, Shane. I think
Yes.
you and Troy and Gary are in the
Mhm.
forefront of that
Yeah,
message. And I think
and we also have to give acknowledgement to the work that Honorable Carvin Malone has been doing.
and look exactly
Uh,
yeah,
I remember going to a meeting, or I read it in one of the news headlines, where the commission was encouraging people, because they were saying, in other jurisdictions, when these types of meetings are held, people are more politically active, right, or politically engaged. Because even now I hear people say, I don't really like to get involved in politics, but politics, as I would say on this show now for the last 11 years plus, it's about life. It's about your daily life. Everything that happens to you, from walking into the hospital, the post office, the mortuary, everything goes back some way to a policy. And that is what politicians or policy makers are elected to do. Not some of this other stuff we have been seeing over the years that they get involved in. That's a whole nother show. So it's something where when we start to understand again how the country is run, as we see it, right? And the importance of looking for people with the qualifications and the heart for people and country to go and sit in the cabinet, or sit in the House of Assembly, you have to take it more serious than just, this person is popular, they talk well, but then when it comes time to understanding, what's the needs of the country and the people, because when we talk about needs of people, we're not talking about just, the physical infrastructure and the roads, but, the different social services. Carmel and I were talking before about, the difference of a policy that says, let's give the people a tax break up to $10,000 on their income, right? So that they have more disposable income to live on, because the minimum wage is not a living wage. And we need to not fool ourselves anymore that we don't have poverty in the Virgin Islands. It has crept in, especially since the hurricane, then the pandemic, where people lost jobs for months at a time, but the bills don't stop.
Right.
You understand? And sometimes they're not in a position to get better wages. Unlike the US, I mean, people can bounce around from job to job because they're able to go and find better wages because of the current economy, where the inflation is actually working in their favor. But we don't have that there in terms of people are able to command higher wages. And that's why the UK is under duress with all these strikes, because they're saying, well, since nothing is being done to get inflation down and make it affordable for us to live, before we starve or freeze to death, we want a higher wage so we can pay for heating and still buy bread. That is what a lot of the striking in Europe period has been happening over the last year. If persons have been, paying attention, that's what it's
And
about.
that comes through organization.
Yes.
We don't have organization.
Well, that's what we're gonna work on now.
Because we properly organized society could
Yeah.
have very well say, you know what, we have a moratorium on bills for the whole year after the hurricane. We ain't paying no more bills.
Give people a chance to
we're going to pay all the bills collectively. The Treasury going to pay all our bills for the year that we come from the hurricane. I mean, that's people power.
Yeah.
If the businesses don't adhere to that, we ain't working, we ain't got no money to spend, we ain't buying nothing, and nobody ain't making no money. So we either gonna share the hardship together, or we gonna just
shut it down.
Turn the bottom up. It's like, but let me just calm down.
Well, we're gonna stick a pin because we're over time. We're over time tonight, but I want to encourage everybody. We coming back next week. We didn't have any calls, but we did get
we need to organize
comments. Well, we'll talk about that next week. But just to let persons know, whether you're listening on the radio or online, I shared the link. Hopefully it's the right link, because I was having an issue there finding it on the community college Facebook page. It actually found the link for the YouTube, where it was a presentation Dr. Corbin did. So he gave us a synopsis of the self-governance assessment report. And then I actually moderated a conversation with him and asked him questions about the report. So it's definitely excellent information for us to arm ourselves with, to be more au fait with what it is that report was saying to us. And again, we still have a lot of work to do. That's what the report said, essentially. But it said that it can be done, because from a technical standpoint, we are more educated than 50 years ago, meaning we have the skill sets when it comes to dealing with our different affairs, which we've demonstrated, I think, fairly well, contrary to current situation. But that being the case, we still have now in front of us to decide, well, what is it we're trying to lay down for the next 50 years, for that unborn generation, not just for us now, right? So we have quite a few things to cover next week again, but I didn't want to try to, overload people with information. And I think, though, we gave a good semblance in terms of who's the captain of the ship. And these are the questions that we have to answer with this new constitution, as far as who do we want then to be the captain of the ship, and what the checks and the balance of power needs to look like. How is it going to transition over the next years? Because these are the questions in the terms of reference about that we have to get to. Okay, so word of encouragement for the rest of the week, well, into the weekend, and reminding us democracy is the government of the people, by the people, for the people. And this was said by Abraham Lincoln. right? So again, if you just tune in for the for the last tale of this on Tola Radio VI, I thank them for simulcasting with us, FM 100.5. You can go on the Vigilante Dialogues Facebook page or our YouTube channel, subscribe. So whenever we schedule an event, you will get the notification on both of them that lets you know what's been happening. And I think that's all we have. So until next time, I am Shaina Smith Archer and friends, Gary Reimer, Edgewenka, here discussing, current affairs, especially talking about the constitutional review and where we want to go with our country. So I thank you for tuning in.
Quickly, Shaina. Next week we hope
go ahead, Elda. Go ahead.
We hope to get try.
Oh,
And,
yes.
And talk about the decolonization, decolonization of the language of the Constitution.
Well, there you go. So we'll pick that up next week. Until next time, let's continue the change in conversation for a better Virgin Islands. Have a good evening.
Peace and blessings.